Hey guys, this is my XR650R. It is probably one of my favorite motorcycles ever made by Honda. Honda's made some amazing bikes, but I'm not really like a fanboy of Honda, but this is an amazing bike. And I think a lot of people mistake it for a 650L, but it's not. It's a completely different bike. I kind of wish that Honda would name it a little bit different. But I wanted to take you over a little bit about this bike. So this bike makes about the same horsepower that my V-Strom made, but with one cylinder. And it is so much lighter. So the power to weight ratio is incredibly high on it. And you might be thinking, why even get an XR650R in 2020? Well, the first thing is that these engines are much more reliable than a CRF 450. And I was considering a CRF 450, but the problem is they're generally more expensive and they require a little bit more maintenance. And I've heard of those bikes having many more problems compared to these. It's not that CRF 450 is a bad bike, but when it comes to reliability and durability, there's a reason these bikes are still around from the year 2000. That's a 20-year-old bike that's still being abused out in single tracks and on the highways and in Supermoto form. This bike currently sits as a Supermoto, and as a Supermoto, this is the first time I've had one of these in Supermoto form, and I am very surprised how good it is, how fun it is. It's probably by far the most fun bike I have ever had. And you know, I liked my XR650R before in dirt wheels. I thought it was incredibly fun to ride, but with the Supermoto wheels, it feels like you're going into corners and you have so much ground clearance, you can just keep leaning the bike. I have yet to really use the power of this bike. It's a 650, but it's not a 650 for beginners. It's not one of these bikes that you get if you're learning to ride. It can get you in serious trouble. You know, you can get a V-Strom 650 and it's going to be one of these bikes that you can learn to ride because it doesn't create that much power. But the problem with this is that it is just so incredibly torquey and powerful. You know, Honda made this to replace the XR600. The XR600 is another super great bike, and I've never even ridden one, but I've heard great things about its reliability. The interesting thing about the 650R is that it's a liquid cooled, and it's got the oil in the frame. It's also got an aluminum frame, so it's a very different platform than the 650L. And of course it's got this. That's a Kickstarter, and that's right, there is no electric start on this bike. This bike weighs 277 pounds. That's extremely light for a road bike, but there are a couple aspects of this bike. For example, you can ride this on the road or you can ride this in the dirt, and the bike operates very different in both. Of course, a lot of these XR650Rs in the used marketplace have been street legal. This one's street legal, and at first when I got my XR650, I had to get it legalized because it was a dirt bike. It comes as a dirt bike, off-road only, but a lot of people converted them to street, and there is a process for it. You know, first you have to get the kit, and this one's got a Baja Designs kit, and the kit itself is like $800, so that is a very expensive part all its own. So the good thing about the XR650R is that it's been street legal. Most of these have been street legal over the years. And installing it is a little bit difficult because you have to run all of these wires everywhere. And then in Maryland, where I live, near DC, I had to take it into the state troopers for inspection when I got this running. So after that, I was given a certificate. And with that certificate, I had to get another inspection. And it was a regular inspection for cars, and that's what I had to do. I had to get it inspected after the state trooper inspected it. Then I had to get it titled. So the process of this was very expensive and very time consuming. So that is one of the reasons you might want to consider the XR650R over the CRF 450. Now I have like ridden with CRF 450s, and I've ridden a CRF 450 in the dirt, and the bike actually creates similar power. Not similar powers, like on paper, the CRF does create similar power compared to this, but the way the power on this is so much different. It's got much more torque, and it feels torqueier. On paper, it does not seem like it creates a huge amount of power over the CRF, but when you ride it, and I think it's a lot more evident in the street, the CRF feels faster, but this feels like torqueier. It feels like a tractor. So if you like the long stroke 650s, this is probably the last open class XR650 with a long stroke thumper. And it's incredibly fun. You know, this is one of these bikes that you get if you just want to have fun. And you can ride it on single tracks. Guys off-road them all the time. Most of these bikes have been concentrated on the West Coast. This bike is perfect for the West Coast of the United States because it's like an open class, top speed sort of dirt bike made for open roads. But I've ridden with a lot of guys on XR650s, and in the East Coast, this bike will do every single track, every single trail that a smaller bike will. It just requires a better rider. And riding this thing off-road requires a different sort of technique. Normally when you ride the 250 off-road, you can kind of pick your lines a little bit better, I think. It's a little bit more maneuverable. But with this sort of bike, what you have to do is just give it gas, and the bike actually like does all the work for you. You just kind of have to hang on. And it's a little bit of an odd sort of feeling, because if you're riding on gravel and you're riding on like big boulders, the bike just like kind of goes. You just have to like keep your hands on the handlebars and hope that you don't get thrown off. But the people that ride this, I do have a lot of respect for them, because it's such a big bike and it's such a big powerful bike that it requires a lot of skill to ride correctly. And you do see a segment of off-road riders that prefer these very large bikes because they're much more comfortable. They have so much more torque, you can ride them in almost like any single gear off-road and you're fine. But what I like about this current setup is the dual sport Supermoto aspect of it. In Supermoto form, I don't know of a lot of bikes that are the equivalent, because you can get a KTM Supermoto 640, 6 whatever it is, 690, and it's not going to be as good as this. And I'm talking more about durability. KTM makes like really incredible bikes, but the ones I've ridden, they have so much vibration, they're very uncomfortable, and this is a comfortable Supermoto with a very smooth motor by Honda that's extremely durable. And that's what I like about it. It's that this bike gives you a lot of fun, and it gives you a lot of fun for very little money. You can get one of these XR650s possibly with Supermoto wheels, CRF 450 front end for like $5,000. And I think over the long run, I think this still is a much better bike. At least it's a better bike for me. I do wish that Honda would bring back the XR650R in the form of a CRF 650R or L that's been dual sported, liquid cooled, it's got the electric start and fuel injection. That would really change the game. I don't see the point of even having the 650L in there, because I wish they would make it a little bit better. The Honda 650L is still air cooled. It's a great bike, but I think they need something like this. They need to bring back the big red pig. If you see the trends on Honda, they do bring back bikes that were popular at one point. You know, they brought back the Honda Africa Twin. They bring back the Honda Monkey, and they just start like building these little segments, because they do realize that they kind of build a small niche for riders and for drivers, and they eventually stop the production, either because there's not enough of them sold, but also they bring it back because I think it builds this nostalgia for the bikes. And I think they might bring this back, and you can kind of see the trend of motorcycle companies building bigger and bigger bikes. And I think this was like a time when people were building really big bikes, and then they started cutting down into smaller bikes, and now people are starting to get into bigger bikes again. But I really enjoy this bike. As a dirt rider, this is not a good bike for me because I'm not a very good dirt rider, but on the street, this is a really workable bike. It's a really fun bike. So if you're thinking about getting a Supermoto or a dual sport, you might want to consider one of these old big red pigs. I think they make much more sense for riding on the street than a smaller 400 from Honda or Yamaha. I really like this bike, and I think if you see my videos where I'm riding this thing, you can see that there's a certain quality to this bike that a lot of motorcycles don't have. This bike comes with a dual sport kit from Baja Designs, and this is how you start the bike. There's an on and off position, and now you have parking lights, you have your high beam, you have your regular headlights, and then your high beam. This is your turn signal, left and right. Horn. The horn is barely noticeable when the engine is actually running, so this is almost useless. And then over here on this side, you have your kill switch. But most of the time you're not going to be using this as the kill switch. You'll probably just turn it off, but it's there. An interesting thing about the XR650, because it's such a big bike and you have the Kickstarter, there is this, which is a decompression lever, and you just kind of pull it back, and that lets you have no compression on the engine. That way you can kick it over and you can start the bike much easier. Now, a lot of people use this when they drop the bike. You use this, you pull it in, and you kick it over like 10 times, and then you let go, and then you kick it once, and it should start. This one is equipped with a service hand guards, and they have the metal over here to protect it. So if you don't want this deflector, you can remove it and just let this help you. But this is always good to have. Your brakes are really well protected. One of the things that happens when you're riding dirt is that you'll break brake levers and clutch levers. This bike uses a twist cap, and this is a lot better than the metal ones that Honda sometimes uses on their CB500s. This is a very small tank that comes with a bike, and you're going to get a range of about 50 miles, which is kind of terrible. But this is a high-powered, gas-guzzling bike. This bike has got Pro Taper handlebars. This is a common mod on the XR650. Usually people have to get this adapter to make it so you can put these oversized handlebars on your bikes. And there are all sorts of colors. I actually have a few from my previous XR650. The stock handlebars, generally people remove them and they just put Pro Tapers. There's a different sort of bend for riding that riders prefer. And this one works really well. This one is equipped with a different aftermarket shift lever. It's a TOC1 Racing, and it's great. And the good thing is that this folds in, so if you ever drop the bike, you're not going to be breaking it. It's also got very popular IMS foot pegs, and they have like a lot of teeth on there, so you can not lose grip when you're riding. Generally, the bikes come with a plastic bash plate, but this one's got an aluminum one. The previous owner actually even removed it because all he did was ride on the roads, but I put it back on. This kind of protects the coolant. So this one's a liquid cooled bike, and that's the important thing about this bike compared to the XR650L. This is a counter sprocket billet cover that was added. It looks much nicer than the stock. It's got a massive kickstand. Look at this thing, it goes for miles. On the left side of the engine, you have your air filter, and it uses these little clips that make it really easy to service the air filter. Since this is a full-on dirt bike, it sees a lot of use in deserts, and oftentimes there's all sorts of debris that end up over here. The previous owner gave me an extra stock that was drilled to get more air into it. I prefer this look. This XR650R comes with this. A lot of people might not know that ride road bikes what this is, but this is a kickstart, and this is a very big bike to kickstart, but there is no electric start on this bike. You have to use this. There are kits that you can get that convert it into electric, but for me, having a kickstart is kind of cool. Outside of a coffee shop, you just kick kick it to life, but it is kind of a workout kicking this beast over. One of the common complaints about the XR650R is that this rear brake is so tucked in behind this that oftentimes people will miss it. So it takes a little bit of a getting used to and finding that, especially if you're using motocross boots, it's very difficult to kind of hit it. But luckily Honda designed it in such a way that it's got plenty of grip on it. This has got a petcock, very simple. The fuel flows from the gas tank. There is no fuel pump. It goes straight into the carburetor, and like there's just a little bit of tiny bit of a hose here, and that's all you need. So it's like no need for pumps. A lot of times bikes are over-engineered. This one's gravity fed directly onto the carburetor, and of course it's got a couple of positions onto the petcock. So the XR, normally when you stop riding, you should put it in off, especially to drain the carburetor. I usually stop the fuel from running it, and then I just let it run until it just runs out. This is the on position for the petcock. This is where it flows most of the gas, and then you do have a reserve, which is down, but most of the time you're going to be leaving it up. This is kind of high quality. It seems to be in pretty good shape. This is a 20-year-old bike. This one of course has been modded up with Supermoto wheels, and these Supermoto wheels are really fantastic. This is my first time riding a Supermoto, and I didn't really know. I think I would really enjoy Supermotos, but in a way I am glad I found an XR650 Supermoto, because they are extremely fun. There is no compromise. The only downside is the electrics, because this is an off-road bike. It doesn't create a lot of power to the electrics. One thing is pretty well known: these bikes are reliable. This is where the oil is. So this is one of the reasons that this bike is completely different than the XR650L. You have a dipstick here. With a tank, it actually makes it a little bit difficult to check the oil. The way to check the oil is after you run the bike for about 5 minutes, you can check the dipstick. I always found that this is like a very odd placement. I kind of wish they made it like a little bit longer, and there's like a way of putting the dipstick in so it actually goes into the threads. The radiator here, and of course this is so different than the XR650L, and of course it's a 2000 version, but the frame is all aluminum, and it's a beefy frame. It's rigid, you know. I think people really like this. And look at that carburetor. Look at the size of that massive carburetor. A lot of people uncork these, so uncorking is something that you only hear specific to the XR650R. And when you get this bike and it's stock, it's a very wimpy bike, and a lot of people think there's something really wrong with it, and then people uncork it and it really flows really well. It's a very common mod, and most of the time you're already gonna get a uncorked XR650. This is where the oil filter is. I don't like this system because it's one of those paper elements. Sometimes people can get like the reusable ones, but I would much rather have a cartridge type of filter, but you know, they try to save, I guess, some weight. You know, when you look at the engine of the 650R, it is very, very simple. And you can tell like it's a small engine, very compact engine compared to a lot of bikes, because you can kind of see through it. But I really find this engine quite fascinating. There's, you know, it's a kickstart, so there's no starter, so it keeps things a lot simpler. I mean, you know, a lot of times I kind of wish I had an electric start. You know, one of the things I will say is that when you're riding the bike, because the oil is in the frame itself, what I hear is that the head bearings on these goes bad once in a while, and I think it's just the type of bike, the design, because it gets so hot here because of the oil, that you know, it tends to wear out the bearings. But I've never had an issue in any of my XRs having these bearings ever go out. But of course this is new bearings because this uses a CRF 450 front end. When you're doing a valve adjustment, you have to remove this entire like top cover. But on this XR650R, that I really like is that the valves are adjusted, and all you have to do is remove these two bolts. They're 6 millimeters and 6 millimeters here. This is one side and this is another side. So I like this system because any home mechanic can adjust this very easily. I wanted to show you something very interesting. It's this choke. This is the choke of the bike, and it's so hidden. It's like a long piece of plastic, and there's 3 positions. This is the off position when it's down. This is the midway, and that is full choke. You always, on these XRs, they run pretty well. You don't need to even touch this, so just leave it like that. I wanted to show you something very interesting. It's this choke. This is the choke of the bike, and it's so hidden. It's like a long piece of plastic, and there's 3 positions. This is the off position when it's down. This is the midway, and that is full choke. You always, on these XRs, they run pretty well. You don't need to even touch this, so just leave it like that. This bike uses Supermoto wheels. They're 17 inches, and it also has an oversized rotor, so stopping power is greatly increased with this. The stock XR650R had decent brakes, but these are so much better for the street. Of course, this one's got CRF 450 forks, which are upside down. This one has a front fender, and it's the stock one, but it's been cut to look more Supermoto. The stock front fender from a XR650R is much longer and swoops down quite a bit to stop the mud from kicking up. It's got a 2-pin piston brake caliper up front, and it's got a bracket that lets you push back the caliper so it can use this massive disc rotor. This bike actually has a glass headlight, which is kind of rare. Most of these are plastic. It also has an HID light. The ballast is behind the bulb, and it's got LED turn signals that are kind of tucked in here. This is the way to go. You don't want to have turn signals that come out quite a bit because a lot of people drop this bike. You have access to your air filter over here. All you have to do is remove this cover using these very easy quick release bolts, and this kind of just pops out, and that's your air filter element. Very easy to remove. I also have a plug here that I can use to charge up my lithium battery, and the battery, it's the dual sport kit, and it just runs the headlights and the turn signals for a very limited amount of time. So on this are kind of tucked in here. Then this bike is so loud and makes so much power and vibration that they're always coming loose. So what I'm thinking is placing them here, getting some flush mounts, putting them here. So you do have your brake light here. This is the stock brake light. It's not DOT approved. I do have the plastic for underneath. Normally for legalization, you have to have a light on your license plate and a brake light with a glass that's DOT. This is not DOT, but it's actually connected to the brake system. So a lot of times people will still use this because this doesn't break. But if you were to put it, or dual sport kit here with the tag here and the light and stuff, it vibrates this quite a bit. And also if you do jumps or anything, it tends to bend the license plate. This one's got a pretty decent system. This kit with the speedometer is actually wired into the thermostat, and it's wired into the spark plug to provide you with a lot of readouts. The only thing that I'm having issues with is the speedo. The speedo is not working, but everything else seems to be working. And you do have a phone mount, so this is what I'm using for my speedo. This bike is equipped with mirrors, bar end mirrors. I think that's the way to go on these bikes. Two Brothers exhaust pipe. It is extremely loud, and I don't quite like how loud it is. The stock Big Red Pigs actually sounds extremely good, but with this, it's almost like a straight through pipe. It is extremely loud, and it calls the attention of a lot of police. You have a warp rotor here. That's not stock at all. And it's also got an aftermarket rotor protector. You have a fairly decent system for adjusting the chain. So you loosen the axle bolt, and then you just use this to kind of push it out a little bit. This one uses the paper element oil filters, and it's right over here. You have to remove this. It's a little messy to do an oil change, but not terrible. This bike is horribly loud, but I actually like it. I love the sound of this thumper. This is one of these bikes that if you want to just have fun, everybody needs to ride one of these once in a while. I had a guy that tried to buy this thing off of me, and it was his first bike. He was 19 and he had no money. So I'm not really sure how he expects to pay for it. It's like a lot of people just want to message you and kind of waste your time for no reason. They don't realize what it is. But I don't know, I guess it's being naive or something. It feels good to be moving though. God damn, man, this bike is just pure fun and Supermoto trim. Got a lot of engine braking, so you can go into corners and let the engine kind of slow you down. There's the Supermoto. I don't know if power is it brings that front end up, you know, when you gas it up. It does feel like it's, god damn, this thing is so quick. Every single bike that I've seen that's been a XR650R has been street legal. People, it's not like people are just riding these on the street in Supermoto form all the time. Before, people just wanted to get to the trails, and it's a lot easier to get to trails if you can ride there. Downsides with this bike is that when you're in town and you have to ride it slow, it is almost unbearable. I get very angry at like people going slow when I'm riding this bike, because I want them to at least go a little bit faster. But there's like some people that like going under the speed limit, and they make your life a living hell. People get these for a whole different sort of riding. So the Supermoto thing is actually kind of new for the XR650R. Only of lately people have been starting to get these and put them as Supermotos, because you can get the bike itself for like $3,000, and then you get the Supermoto wheels, the forks. So that's kind of established now, but before then, this was a great dual sport. And I think this is probably one of the greater dual sports you can get. I've done a couple of videos on that. So first of all, it's an off-road bike. So that means that from the factory, it's not street legal. And that's kind of a shame. But most of these in the used market have been dual sported, because people realize that this bike is unbelievably good on the street and in the dirt. It'll do single track fine. It will do single track, but the problem is you have to be a very good rider to ride this thing on a single track really well. And I have seen some amazing 650R riders that rode much better than 250 guys. I'm not one of them. I always struggled off-road on this bike, but on the street and in dual sport format, when you go from your house to a trail, you can just ride there and you have plenty of power. And once you get into the dirt, you can still ride all the trails. And it's not like you're sacrificing much. The only sacrifice is that this bike is a kickstart, and that might not seem to be a bad thing, but when it's hot, when it's boiling out, it is extremely difficult to kick if you're tired. So if you're riding in the dirt and you don't know how to ride in the dirt, you're constantly struggling. And in my case, that's always been the case. You're always struggling, and then you drop it, you pick it up, you're tired, and then you go to kickstart it. It's a workout. But that is a little downside. Another downside is the carburetor on this from the factory has never been perfect. It's never been like smooth. So the power delivery of this bike is abrupt. But for me, when I ride on the street, I actually kind of like that abruptness because it makes it very interesting to ride. It feels like a very powerful horse that you're riding, that you're constantly going to be like thrown off. I don't know, maybe that's not a good way of looking at it, but I've always felt that this 650R was one of these bikes that just made a whole lot of sense for dual sporters. It makes a whole lot of sense, and I think this thing as a Supermoto, god damn, this bike is just so fun to ride as a Supermoto. It really is, and I think it looks amazing. Except this part, I don't like the previous owner did that, but the previous owner, along with a lot of the XR650R aficionados, they love this bike. They absolutely love this bike. There's a cult following for the XR650R, and I think that's the reason Honda will eventually bring this back. I think they will bring it back in the form of a CRF650R, or even like a CRF700R with an electric start, liquid cooled, fuel injected bike that's going to be already street legal. I think that's what's going to happen, and I will bet you that they will do that, because they brought back the Africa Twin. So if they brought back the Africa Twin, why not bring this thing? This is essentially the dirt version of the Africa Twin, an overly large dirt bike that only a few people can ride well off-road with it. And I think that's the allure. Something so big, so powerful, so heavy in the dirt, that if you can ride this thing off-road well, you can ride anything off-road well. I love this bike. This bike is just so fun to ride, but it is not a fun bike to kickstart. That's something that I don't like about this bike. Ugh. There we go. Listen to it. God damn, this bike just sounds so badass. Oh yeah, no problem at all getting out of there. Whoa, I slipped like crazy there. Well, squids, thanks for watching. I really appreciate it. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and that like button. It really helps out the channel. Alright guys, I will see you in the next video. Stay safe out there.